Aloha kako! Here we are for another session talking about Hawaiian cultural things. I've been off to Hawaii very recently doing a whole lot of teaching and cultural teaching, and that's always a great pleasure for me. I'm Kaimiloa Chrisman. It's been a while since we've had one of these talks, but we've got this one coming and then another one shortly on how to use the old-time tools to get things done without any metal. And then another one on Hawaiian ornaments, and we'll see what goes after that. I want to thank you all that have subscribed. I'm so naive when I started doing this for teaching purposes alone that I've never asked anybody to like or subscribe. So I guess I should mention that now. Please like and subscribe. But we've got quite a few subscribers, as I say, much to my delight. And my purpose is to pass on the Hawaiian cultural knowledge that I've gained in the last 50 years. I've done a lot of teaching. I've done a lot of experimental archaeology. I've done a lot of creating of a huge number of Hawaiian things, a lot of stone-on-stone work, as you can see in one of the other videos. And today we're going to talk about Hawaiian adzes, which were critically important in the old times. They were made of stone, a stone called basalt, which is very hard volcanic stone. They didn't have any flint, they didn't have any chert, they had almost no obsidian in Hawaii because they're high volcanic islands. So they had to make the adzes out of this dense stone called basalt, and the best stuff was up on the top of Mauna Kea Mountain on the Big Island of Hawaii. That's a famous quarry up there at about 9,500 feet. I've been there, I've seen the huge flakes and things that they were throwing off with must have been huge hammer stones to break those big flakes off, and then begin to shape those into blanks. And the best of them would have been carried back down to the shore where they'd finish shaping and then do the grinding that created the finished adze. So an adze, as some of you might know, is a tool that has a blade like this. It hits like this. It doesn't hit like this like a hatchet or an axe. It has a blade like this. And what it does is give you tremendous control over the strikes. The strikes may be very, very, very delicate if you want to carve something, or they can be heavy if you want to cut down a tree. But it's a totally different kind of tool than an axe or a hatchet, and it had its own high qualities. So what they had to do with the basalt was, first of all, break the pieces of basalt up into small enough forms that they could then flake that with smaller and smaller and smaller flakes to create a shape which they could then grind. They never did peck, as I've ever seen. I have never seen an adze that looked like it had been pecked to shape it before the grinding. And by pecking, I mean something like this. This is a pestle that I made some time ago. Probably took me about 6 or 8 hours. Real hard basalt, not real dense. But it's got little tiny peck marks all over it, and by hitting it with a hammer stone hundreds and thousands of times, that's how this was shaped. But with an adze, they would flake it. So here is an example of a Hawaiian-style adze, and they're advanced in their adze making in that it was 4-sided. It had a top and a bottom and 2 sides, and it also had what's called a drop tang. This area back here where the lashing went on, the cordage lashing that held the head onto the wooden handle, was dropped down from the line of striking so that the lashing didn't get worn all the time like the adzes elsewhere in Polynesia. So that was a real advancement. This one is just a model, but you can see the curve underneath here on the bottom that made the blade. The top is ground clear off flat, so that when the curve meets it, it makes a nice sharp edge, and they really were quite sharp. So this is a little bitty blank, remarkable. I found this on the Big Island, over near Waimea on the Big Island. And it's about 3 inches long and a little less than 3/8 of an inch thick. And you can see, I think, the flaking on this piece. Some incredible expert flaked this with multiple hits that had to be incredibly precise to throw off a little bit of stone along the edge, and at the same time not hit a little too far toward the middle and break the thing. It's got flake after flake after flake after flake, and all along here, and even where the blade was going to be, there are tiny little flakes. It's one of the most perfect blanks that I've seen, although I've seen 3 now, great big adze blanks, about this long, where the whole thing is so perfect that you could grind it probably in less than a day, finish the whole grinding on the adze. So here's some larger ones. This is what would be a felling adze. So as you can see, it's much more massive. It has much, much more bulk in the body part here. The blade is fairly wide. It's also got a curved blade at the front rather than a straight edge. You can see the drop tang right here. And the form of it, as I said, is quadrangular, four-sided. So this one has been made in modern times and smoothed probably with modern tools by a friend of mine about 30 years ago. And then the curve here brings it up to the edge. The edge is really about as sharp as any modern axe or hatchet blade would be. And it's been ground up here on the top and on the sides, and that's exactly like the old ones were. But I'm sure what he was using was some kind of hydraulic press where he could use a specific steel tool and press and press and press to knock off flake after flake. And to be able to do that in the old times with just a hammerstone is absolutely unbelievable. I've done an awful lot of work with flint and chert that the Native Americans used, and it's tricky, but you can do all kinds of flaking with that. But this is an actual one that came from my property on the Big Island. I found this one day when I was picking up a bunch of irrigation tubing, and I just was in a mood to do some chanting, so I was practicing a chant as I went along real slowly, pulling this tubing up out of a whole lot of viney grass. And all of a sudden I saw just one little flake in the dirt where one of the cow's hooves had knocked the dirt aside, and I knew it was a human-made flake, and I started digging it up, digging and digging and digging, finally got this up, and that place had been plowed many times because it was old sugarcane land. And you can see some of the hits here where the discs or the plows were hitting here and here. There's another little one here. There's one on the edge right here, and a fresh one right here. The outer side is kind of gray from oxidation, but the dark black color is what they originally looked like. So it's been ground all on the side here. The whole top has been ground all down the side here. The underside here has been ground more coarsely, where it tied onto the wooden handle. And then it's been ground very cleanly up here, and is still remarkably sharp, although, as I said, the disc or plow knocked a little nick off of it there. So that's a felling adze, and so it can handle a much, much heavier handle, a much thicker handle. I'm going to explain in a minute why I'm talking about with that. But anyway, this is the kind of thing that you use to cut down a tree. It weighs 3 3/4 pounds. It's a pretty hefty thing. So the one you just looked at that was black here, this one, was my friend's replica of that one. So I can mount this up and actually try it. I would never try a thinner adze because the skill set needed to use those stone adzes is really great. And the ones I've seen mounted up nowadays here and there and used, I believe, at least for rough work, I just wonder how many times they chip those blades, because in a thinner blade, like you're going to see in a minute, as soon as that thin basalt blade hits like a hard knot in hard kauwila wood or uhi or can't think of the name. The real hardwoods that Hawaiians used in the old times, they're super hard. And you hit that wood, especially a little knot in that wood just the wrong way, and you're going to chip that adze blade. And then it takes hours and hours and hours to try to improve it. So once we get through all these adzes here that we're going to talk about, and some more about the chipping and the hammer stones and how I think they had to do that in the old time, and the stone itself, we're going to get into the metal adze blades, because Captain Cook arrived in Hawaii in 1778, came back in 1779, and they had iron. And the Hawaiians wanted that really bad. They knew what it was. They just didn't know how to work it. They probably found iron and perhaps bronze and pieces of wood that had floated up to Hawaii over the centuries from shipwrecks elsewhere, even way off in the Sea of Japan. Things would float all the way up along the Aleutian Islands, down the coast of Alaska, down the coast of Canada, and about northern California. There's a current that comes out to Hawaii. So glass balls from way up there in the Sea of Japan end up in Kauai and elsewhere in Hawaii, and so does some of the wood. So they knew what it was, and they were anxious to get it because it's so superior, and it doesn't break, of course, like the stone does, or the steel or iron blade will last a whole lot better. So if you could bear with me here as we go through a lot of things, which to some of you will be boring, stick with me because we'll hit on things that are interesting to almost everybody as we go along here. And when I get done with the stone part, as I said, we'll go into the steel adzes, or the iron adzes back then, and what the difference is about them, and what the difference of the handle can be and the usage can be, because of the qualities of steel and iron. It is so much less brittle than the stone was. So let's look at a couple other interesting things. Way up on Mauna Kea, where they're breaking off flakes the size of my palm, thousands of flakes are up there still to this day. They had to have some kind of a machine, I think like a great big teeter-totter type thing that had a huge stone on the end of it or something, and would drop it on carefully arranged blocks of basalt and knock off those big flakes. I don't think any human alive could have been big enough and strong enough to use a hammerstone big enough to break off those flakes. But what you want is those big, big pieces to work with to try to shape something like an adze like we just talked about. And also smaller pieces like this little one that are really, really fine material, and then work it down with smaller and smaller hammerstones and greater skill to get the blanks, which you then would go and grind. So how did they grind them? So down near the shore in stream beds, some say in the sea, I don't think so because the tide goes up and down and a storm might take it away. This is just a fragment of a hoana, a grinding stone, and it's really, really pretty hard basalt. It's got a few little holes and things in it, but it's very much ground, and when I turn it just right, I can see shiny places on it, which means somebody used a steel blade on it at some later time too. But it probably was as big around as this, and somehow or another it got broken. And I brought it out here in particular to show the basalt. This is so-so material. You could make something out of this, preferably not an adze, but it's just got too many pores and things in it to be very good as an adze. It's too likely to have flaws that would break. But over time, gradually, this thing would get rounded out and hollowed out in the middle from grinding over and over and over and over. And what I've learned is that if you use green sand like you can find from the beaches in southern Kona, the western side of the Big Island, that green sand is olivine. It's a crystal that's harder than basalt. And if you put that green sand on here and grind with that, the green sand will be caught in the little pores and act as a very good grinder. Or you can make an artificial stone like this and flatten it by pecking that's got more pores, and sprinkle the green sand and a little water on there and use it to grind. So, the other thing, the reason I brought this piece out is if I found something like that as an adze maker that was already a piece that nature had broken out like that, I would just think I'd died and gone to heaven, because that's just waiting to have big flakes knocked off of this thing on both sides and begin to shape it into an adze. It's already dropped off some on this side where that drop tang would be. So that would be ideal, but most of the time they just had to work with great big pieces of stone and try to get them to do what they wanted them to do. Now what about after you made the adze? How were you going to sharpen it? They probably had to sharpen the blade about every 5 minutes or so, because the basalt is good, but it's not near as hard as steel. And so, especially on hardwood and things, it's going to wear down pretty quick. And you really want it to be really, really sharp. You want it to feel really sharp to your finger, just like a modern steel axe or adze when it's really well sharpened. Because the better it is, the smoother it is, the better it's going to do the work that I'm going to show you how you do very shortly. So what did they do? They had to have had something handy. Probably they had little stones they could just tuck into their malo when they were working. But this is one here. This is a hoana, also just a small handy one here. And it's somewhat porous basalt, as you can see. It's shiny on this side, so it's been used to a degree on this side. And it's very shiny and flat on this side. Clearly it's been used an awful lot to do that grinding and sharpening the adze. It's very, very smooth. It may or may not have been pecked. I don't see any little pecking marks on here. It may have just been fractured in a flat fashion. But in any case, you need something that's really, really, really smooth, so that when you take the blade and you want to sharpen it, you sharpen it this way, back and forth, like this, and like this. Because if you try to sharpen it this way and it picks up any little pore, any little edge, any little crystal, it'll chip that basalt edge. So you can't sharpen it like this, like you would with a steel blade. You have to sharpen it sideways, so to speak. And so that's the sharpening part. Now when they did that flaking, like I said up on Mauna Kea where the quarry was, and every island had its quarries, one or more, every island. But I think somebody really, really strong probably had a hammerstone as big as that. A great big hammerstone that weighed about 4 or 5 pounds. And this one, just by nature, fits in my hand. I'd have to be a really powerful man to use this over and over and over. But the flakes that they were throwing off were so perfect, one after another after another. With the slightest deviation in the downward force of that blow, or the slightest deviation to the left or to the right, or hitting a little bit to the left or the right, would have cracked the blank right off the bat. So the skill set that it took, this one's just got some debris from lava on here, but the skill set that it would have taken to do that kind of hitting would have taken years and years and years of experience to get to. So that's why ordinary people did not use the adzes, and ordinary people sure weren't shaping the adzes. Sometimes they would break. And this one right here is a hammerstone. It's a real handy hammerstone. It feels real good in your hand. Feels good. But see that flat right there? And this flat over here, right here, a remnant? That was an adze. At one time that was an adze, and it broke, and they repurposed it. And the reason it probably broke is, see this little fracture right here? There was some kind of fault line going right through there. And on the other side here, there's a little bit of a crack right here. Another little fault line right here. So that was good, hard, dense basalt, but it had some fracture problems. And somewhere along the line, the adze was dropped or was hit on and not too hard or something. It was a pretty thick adze, as we can see. But then it became a very useful hammerstone because it's such a good, hard stone. The basalt itself, the really, really good stuff, it looks like this one is polished. And this is just a stone that came from the ocean somewhere. But that pure black poreless stuff is what they really, really wanted for the finest adzes, or the small blades that you wanted to make a small adze or a chisel, a small chisel tip that was either used by hand or with a wooden handle attached to it. That's the really, really good stuff. And occasionally they would make mirrors about that big and about that thick out of this kind of stone, flat, perfectly flat on both sides. Put that in a small, little shallow gourd dish with some water in it, formed a mirror. So they're pretty rare in Hawaii, those mirrors. And lastly, this little stone here, I don't know if we can focus in on that. Let's see if we can get a focus on that. It's just filled with little tiny crystals. It's all flatted off. It's been used as a rubbing stone. But this is another one that I think would be the perfect kind of thing to tuck in your malo if you were sharpening your adze frequently, working on something made of wood, because all those little crystals are harder than the basalt. So when you sharpen the adze, even by hand this way, instead of trying to move the adze blade itself, it definitely would sharpen that adze in pretty good order. An ordinary hammerstone looks like this. So if you were doing the finer flaking, like you've got the adze blank pretty well made, holding it like this with a pretty good edge, like here, then you can strike off pretty good blows, like so, knocking off flakes if you're truly, truly expert. So let's see what some of the adzes here look like. Let's start with the littlest one here. So for very, very, very fine work, they'd have things like this. So that's a tiny little adze. The blade is about just a little over 5/8 of an inch wide. The whole blade itself is no more than 5/16 of an inch wide at the back. It's been polished everywhere. It is a modern made one that my friend made a set for me so I could make these. But anyway, it's set into the wooden handle. There's a little recess here called a mortise where the blade is actually set into the handle because it's too small to sit on top of the handle and still be lashed and stay in place. And something just like this, as you can see, if it was mounted in a wooden handle, would make a perfect chisel as well. Although the chisel would probably have been more, brought down to an edge from both sides. The other thing to say about adze blades is like this one is slightly curved at the front. So we'll be talking about that, especially with the metal adzes. But there's a difference in the workmanship and the purpose of a blade that's curved at the front versus one that's straight at the front. Now here's a bigger one here. Okay, I think we can get a close-up on that. It's got a precise kind of lashing, a fancy kind of lashing, and I'll talk about that in a little while. It also is set into the handle. You can see that mortise, it's sunk down into the handle, And then the back end of it is also sunk in, down into the handle so it can't slip back and forth. You want it to stay in place. The big ones have enough bulk and enough curve to their bottom on the handle that they'll stay in place without being sunken into the handle. And again, here's that kind of lashing that I talked about. We'll get to. The other thing I want to point out right here is, see all these little flats? See these flats running down this handle? That's from adzes. That's from me using a steel adze to shape this handle. So when you use an adze, you're not doing it like, with a hatchet or an axe where you're just beating away with it. You're using it very delicately with a slim handle like this. So check, 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 just a little bit at a time at the same angle. And what that does is create those little flats that I said. Taking just fine little shavings off all the time, over and over, and slowly you can shape something down however you want it to be. So this one again is a pretty slim blade. It's pretty straight at the front, this one, just a very slight curve, but pretty straight. It's sharp, perfectly sharp, just like a steel blade. What's this? This is a flap on blades like this that don't have too much of a drop tang. They'd use some kind of a flap. This is just some canvas, but in those times it would be something like the banana sheath or the sheath that goes around the fruitings of the coconut. But some tapa would be another possibility. And what that does, that little flap does, is it protects the lashing. Every time you're using it like this, it protects this lashing from being rubbed by the contact of the work that you're trying to do. So here's one yet a little bit bigger, right? It's got a ridiculously skinny handle, right? It just looks ridiculously skinny to us because we're all used to axe and hatchet handles. But there's a very, very good reason for this. It took me a long time to figure that out. But here's one now with the drop tang, four-sided adze blade, drop tang. And it's going to sit on there just fine. It's got a little bit of curvature to the underside of the blade itself. And then the blade underneath will have little irregularities. And if it's been carved properly, the handle's been carved properly, it'll be carved to fit those little irregularities and bumps on the bottom of this so that when it's lashed on there, it won't move back and forth. So what about the skinny handle? When you're working with a stone blade, and it took, like I say, years, I think you won't find this anywhere. It's just years and years of thinking about it and learning about using steel ones. When you've got a modern adze or axe, you can have a handle any way you want. It can be steel like this, or it can be a real heavy hatchet handle or axe handle like we're used to. But in the original handles, which you'll seldom see in the photographs because they usually rot away and you see reproductions. But in the few that you'll see that are real old ones, they'll be just ridiculously skinny like this. Why? They usually make the handle out of how wood, H-A-U, how wood. And the how is the same wood that was used on the iako of the canoe. That's that outrigger boom that goes out on each side of the canoe. So that wood is very lightweight, but it's also very springy and strong. It's easy to carve, but it's springy and strong. So they'd make these out of how also. Why? Because it's going to be springy and strong. So if you're holding it like this and you're adzing, and so you're going along here on some kauwila wood that's super, super hard and you hit a knot you didn't realize was there, instead of going thunk like it would be with a modern handle, and many of the ones that I see on reproduction axes today are like that, like a thick modern handle, it's going to break. That's going to chip when it hits that knot. But if it hits some little obstacle like that and it's real springy, it'll just tend to spring back. Secondly, every time you're moving this fairly heavy stone head when you're using it, chip, 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 every time some of your force goes in here to make the blade cut, it's also making a force that causes it to rebound because of the spring in the handle. So those are things I've just learned, as I say, over years of time of playing with these things and thinking about it to explain why did they use real slim handles on the stone adzes and why did they use the how wood. I think both things are explained there. Now we get to one a little different. This has got a curved blade, right? It's getting very sharp. It's got the drop tang. It's got the four sides. This is one that where I bought the handle. I put the blade on there, but I bought this handle. It had some other blade on there originally. But see how thick it is? It's made like a modern handle of some harder wood. That's not what you want with a stone blade. That's just too much for a stone blade, especially a slimmer one like this. If it was real thick like those big felling adzes I mentioned earlier, yeah, you could get by with any kind of handle you want, I think. But for the finer work like we're talking about, where you're just chipping little bits at a time, then that's what you want, something with a thinner handle, not this thicker handle like this. And here's one that's real interesting because the Hawaiians actually had this. That's called a swivel adze. They had it also in Tahiti, so the question would be, because Hawaiians invented so many things on their own stuck out in the middle of the North Pacific, did Tahitians, when they later came up to Hawaii, learn that from the Hawaiians and carry it back to the Society Islands? Or did the Hawaiians learn it from the people that came up from the Society Islands and taught it to them? But since it's nowhere else in Polynesia that I know of, I think it's extremely likely that it was invented by the Hawaiians, they're genius Hawaiians. And then that idea was carried back to Tahiti and had not yet spread to the rest of Polynesia. So if you're working on the bottom of a canoe, you're standing on the top edges of the canoe and working on the bottom of the canoe, you've got the blade this way, right? At right angles to the handle. But if you want to hit on the right side, you can turn it. And now you can cut on the right side, on the inner side of the canoe. And you can turn it over this way, and you can work on the left side of the canoe. And the same thing if you were working down inside of a drum or whatever. So it's absolutely remarkable. It takes a lot of work. It took me a lot of work to make that and figure out, just for myself, would you need something here and something here that wouldn't crack, that could keep this thing in perfect position? How would you make this central piece so it didn't want to move back and forth? Why make it bulgy in the middle? It's narrower here and here than it is here. So it's hard to make that hollow that this fits into. It's hard to make all of this. This is a sunken blade once again, very carefully sunken in here. How do you do that? Sink it in there and make it fit real carefully? I think they probably knew perfectly well about smoking something. So if you used kukui nuts and you smoke the underside of this stone here, you're not going to hurt it a bit. But when you press it against the wood, it'll leave a mark. And then when you carve something like with your shark's tooth knife or one of those little chisels, you carve away every place it makes a mark. And you do that over and over and over. It'll be sunk right in there exactly right. And that's exactly what I used up here, except on this part up here to make this piece fit into here. I just took a piece of charcoal and rubbed it all over and repeatedly turned it back and forth and carved away wherever the mark was. So that's it. That's the swivel adze, as I say. And so this one, I made the handle fairly thick. It would have probably had a thicker blade before, but it was the only handle I had at that time. But how about making the handle? All this part up here that I shaped here, and most of the shaping in here and all the shaping down in here, I found out of all my tools, all my modern tools, all my power tools and everything, my steel adze was the best tool. I had the most control, and I could do the best work at making these little curves and everything. I did sometimes use a little bit of a saw here and here and here and here to make initial cuts, but they could have done the same thing. But all the rest, I pretty much adzed it out and then smoothed it off afterwards. So that's the kind of thing that they were doing in the old times. And what are these things here? These things are top of covers for all of these adzes that I just showed you. And I guarantee you they would have all had that in the old times too, because any little thing that bunks up against this that's fairly hard, this is off the baby one, is going to chip that blade, and then it just takes forever trying to bring it back to a straight edge. So here's something else I wanted to show you as a perfect example of the effects of an adze. This is just a Hawaiian weapon that's in part of the video that's on YouTube here about Hawaiian weapons. But see all these flats here? Start up here and run all the way down. That's me, and that's fairly hard wood. That's Kauai wood. It was used for paddles and spears and shark hooks and things. It's a really good, pretty hard, and very tough kind of wood, but it just took the adzing beautifully, and it gives you a tremendously good grip when you do that too without smoothing it down. A super grip. So that's the beauty of adzing. And lastly here, something really interesting. In times of war, women and of course youth and people who didn't have much experience with an adze would have never been allowed to use the stone blades. They were just too delicate. It took too many years to learn how to use them properly. But when they needed to make a lot of iakos, those outrigger booms, and the ama, the float that was out on the end of those booms for a canoe, for an invasion fleet, for instance, in wartime, the youth and the women were allowed to use this wooden adze. So you can see all my little adze marks on here. This is a hard wood. This is a wood called alahe'e. It was used for digging sticks and things like that, so it's a real hard wood. But they found that if you made an adze out of alahe'e, and you can see the same thing here, right? It's got the flat and the sides and the bottom and the curve and the whole bit. Sharp. It's perfectly sharp on the end like this, like the stone blade. You can cut how with this. I've done it. I've used that to cut how myself. Like I was making an adze handle or something, and it's still sharp. I've had that for a long time. So by the way, where do the adze handles come from? You've got to have a tree like the how tree that grows with branches coming out like this. So this would be the stick part of the tree, the alahe'e tree or the how tree, and this would be the branch. And then you want something that doesn't have very many side branches, which the how doesn't have too often, and that's really helpful. But that's the angle you want on an adze blade. It looks like a lazy number 7. That's about right. Some of them were a little bit flatter like this, and some seldom would they be more steep than this. Some were a little more shallow, depending on what kind of work you wanted to do. So the real thin adze blades, thinner, well, sort of like this one, but maybe even a little thinner and wide, were used to shape planks. So like on the flat platform on the double-hulled canoes, where they were making a plank for that or some other purpose, those real narrow, wide-bladed adzes were used for delicate shaping on flat surfaces like that. Now, lastly, what about the curve versus the straight? So if you've got a curved blade, it's going to be kind of like a big curved chisel. If you hit a big curved chisel with a mallet, that curve will bite in right where the curve is. And the more you hit it, the more that curve is going to go in there and dig and gouge out the wood or splinter off pieces of wood. So if you want that real fine flatting, like I showed here, where you could keep the flat going to chip, 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 you don't want it to dig in. You want it to just skid a little bit each time, and just keep the flake going off a little more and a little more. And that's what a flat blade will do. So the difference is between the curved blade and the flat blade is how much it bites. You can imagine a curved blade, when it bites, is like this. It's biting right with the top part of the curve. And only if you hit real hard do you get more of the curve doing the cutting. It wants to really dig in and scoop out the wood. Whereas a flat one will just kind of skid along on the wood wherever it happens to be contacting it. It doesn't dig in much at all. That's the thing that makes the difference, and it's only when you've used one a lot, like I have, a steel one, not a stone one, a steel one, that you begin to realize what that is like. So when we get to the steel ones here in a minute, I'll explain another factor about that that's really important. And, I want to tell you a little bit about the lashing of the adze, like this. Let's pick this one right here. So this is just me, this is how I do this, but this is real good 3-ply sinnet, which is the coconut husk fiber from somewhere down in the South Pacific. It's extremely to find anything in Hawaii. If anybody's making any good sinnet like this in Hawaii, it's a great rarity. But they do have a different kind of coconut there that has a long husk and a small kernel, and that's called the nio'aha or nio'afa and so on. And that fine fiber from that particular type of coconut tree is what's used to make this really good sinnet. And another thing that's a quality of that is it'll swell up a little bit. So if you were going to use an adze and you soaked it overnight in water, this part, it'll swell up the fiber a little bit and tighten it all the more. Same with a weapon. Anyway, I'll start over here and I'll have a length of this cordage down to about here, about here. So I've got plenty enough here that I can tie at least a double, if not a triple knot. I'm going to hold on to that, bring the cord on up here, and come under here and come up over right here once. Come around again, and then lock that first one with the next cord. So if you look real close right here, you can see how one cord goes over the other cord. The other side doesn't show that. It only has to go over on one side to lock. So you get the first loop up over there and hold it in place, and then bring the next one up over it and lock it. Now you've got a tight tie right there. Now you can bring that cord around here to the back, bring it up over in the back, bring the other one around to lock it. Now you're in business because you've got it locked here and here. You've got it steady in place. And now you're going to do this part here. It just looks fancy. And the way you do that is to come around here, come around to the other side, come up in the middle right here. Come up in the middle, go back down and all the way around, and then back up again right next to the one that you just did, but on the far side of it. So if you did the first one a little toward the front, that's what you want to do, just a little toward the front of the middle. The second one goes just a little toward the back toward the middle. Then it comes down, goes around and up the other side, and one lap further over, and then around and back up the other side, one lap further over from the central ones. So the next one is this much further over, and the next one is this much further over, the next one this much, and the next one this much, until you've used up all this space, and you end up with this nice looking overlap, each of which locks the prior one. A nice looking overlap in the back. This one isn't quite centered, but you can get it that way. And a nice looking overlap here on the side, and another overlap here in the front. So it's just locked, 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 locked by the way you lashed it. And then when you finally get the last one, you come down around here, and if you've got any extra, you just go around 3 or 4 times with the extra and tie it with that tail that you left down here before, and you've got that. So that works real well for me, and I think that is certainly one of the kinds of old-time lashing. This little bitty one, as you can see, is what they had, Olenak cord, this incredibly strong cord that they had in the old times, and it would have been immensely strong even in this size. But I've done the same kind of thing here, except that I don't have the front and the back overlap that I talked about. I only have that fancy lashing here, as you can see. So that's the little one. Now, let's go look at the steel stuff, and what do? How do you make a steel blade for an adze, and what's the difference? So here's 2 of my handles here, and it wouldn't make any difference whether the handle is thick or thin with a steel blade, because it's not going to break no matter what it hits. I just happen to have this one, which has a very interesting curve toward the front. The beauty of that is that it puts your striking hand right up here where your blade is. It's just right there where you're working. Yeah? Hard to find a branch like that. That doesn't happen very often. And so this one has a flap. Because this blade is flat, it needs some kind of protective flap to protect this one. And so this one's already worn a little bit here, but it protects this lashing. This also I've got some old cotton cloth, linen cloth or something around underneath this blade, and it's no, this one is not mortised in. This is sitting right on the top of all this. So when you strike it, it tends to want to move back. That's why you've really got to have something, some kind of cloth or tapa or something under this, and a rough surface here, and a good tight lashing, or when you use it, it'll just start sliding back or getting stuck in the wood and pulling forward. It's got pretty much the same kind of lashing I just talked about. Same kind of thing. This is just some modern cord that's been braided, and the same thing that came down around here and then tied it right here. Lastly, it's got this curved blade, right? Curved blade. And this bevel, the cutting side, this curve is on the underside. The whole blade is about 3/16 of an inch thick. Pretty soon we'll talk about why. But anyway, it's got little dents and marks all over it. That's from the hammer when it was being pounded out to make it into a wider shape here at the front and a little bit broader blade. So then once it's been made, and I'll explain that shortly, then you make this blade. So I've found I don't use this one very much. I don't like it. If I was going to be making chairs or something like that where I really wanted to dig out the seat of the chair or something, I'd love this curved blade, but it doesn't work for me very well with fine work. What does work for me is this one. So this is the same kind of thing, right? The lazy number 7 handle angle. The old-time Hawaiian ones, as you could see, often had a tang at the back. That's just for those rear wraps. And then this one has been mortised in. So I've got the blade sunken in to the handle here a little bit. And at once upon a time I was using this and the blade came out. It came out this way. So I made a lot of little cuts along the top edge of the blade, and I also glued it into place with these little cuts under here in its mortise, so it can't move back and forth. It's been lashed at the front to get a tighter tie right here with some fine cordage. It would have been olana in the old times. It's got some nice canvas here to protect the cordage, and the same kind of wrap that I told you about before, but it didn't have enough room back here to make the wrap, so I just did a lot of wrapping up here at the front where I really needed a good hold, and then did that fancy kind of wrap back here. So what about the last part? This one's got the bevel on the top. Can you see that? The curve is on the top. All the ones, the stone ones, the curve is on the bottom. But this has got the curve on the top. So I had learned about that, in flintlock, old-time flintlock guns, you can have the bevel, so to speak, on the top or the bottom of the flint that's going to hit the steel face and throw sparks into the pan and make the flintlock go off. So I thought, what about this? So if I mount this curve on the top, what happens when I'm using it is if I just strike like this and just curve my hand a little bit with each strike, that top curve will roll that blade right out. It will not want to dig in. It'll just roll right out on its own as I go down it. So it's easy to make those flats, like I told you about on here. Just make a continuous flat like that when you've got that kind of a blade. So I love that thing, and I have used it a lot. If we look real close at this one, at the top here, let's see if we can zoom in on that. See all the little fine lines across there? It's made out of an old file. That's why it looks like that. And this other one that we were looking at, same thing here. This one, I'm not sure about this curved one, but I think that was made out of an old file also. So let's go and look at one more little thing here, and that is this one here. That whole handle's been adzed out, and some wood here in Arizona that's similar to how, but it's got a lot of little tiny knots, so I can't get quite as good of flats and things. But it's quite well mortised. See how it's been cut out like this to fit this little blade? It's some old-time antique blade from some sort of a plane. And then I also inset this area where the wrap goes here. Just mortise that in a little bit so that this is tightly tucked in there and it can't go anywhere. And this is tightly tucked in here. They can't go anywhere. And with this one, I've made the bevel on the bottom. It's a thin blade, some kind of steel blade that was from a tool, as I said, but that's for fine work, real fine work. I haven't used that one too much. So lastly, how are we going to do that? How are you going to make one of these blades? You can go to some blacksmith and get them to make you a blade. And I had some made one time in Bali. I saw the guys making astonishing forging stuff there and had them make me a couple of adze blades. But what you need is just basically something that's got fairly good carbon steel, and that's one of them right there. That's called a farrier's rasp. This is a real old one. It's all rusted. Somebody pounded it out here with heat and made it where it's some kind of a spade-like tool. But it had a raspy top here and then some great big teeth on this side. And a farrier is somebody who works on horseshoes, shoeing horses. So they need a really, really rough rasp to flatten off the bottom of the hoof and the edges of the hoof. And that's real good steel in there. So if you could find one of these, as you can see, it's about a little more than 5/16 of an inch thick. And then when you heat it up, when you get it red hot, you can beat this down, beat these teeth back down into place. Same thing over here. You can flatten it out just like the ones we saw on that one adze blade. The only thing is, if it was rusty like this, you'd want to go down to the hardware store and get modern rust remover, which you can buy by the gallon, and put that on here and get that rust off of there and clean it off so that the metal, once you heat it up red hot, you can beat it down into itself and flatten this out and use as much of the metal as possible for your adze blade. So that's exactly what I did when I made that one adze blade that I spoke about. I just cut a piece off of these. So how do you do that, and how do you make it hard and then sharpen it? The other thing you can use is something like this. This is a spring from some small automobile, something like that. And that's good spring steel too, so that's a perfectly good thing to use. And again, it's about 5/16 of an inch thick. When you heat it up red hot, you can easily flatten it right out. And then you can spread it a little more by hitting it some more and make the blade a little wider at the front if you want to. Something like a lawnmower, or excuse me, a riding mower blade would work, but it's too thin. Usually it's not thick enough material. So when you do that, when you're trying to do that work, which will sound crazy to a lot of you, but it's not that difficult, you need a welding torch or one of those MAP gas type torches. It's got to be really hot, not just a propane torch. Some kind of tongs like this, something like this, or something like this. It's a big, kind of a flat pair of pliers that doesn't have any teeth. Something that you can hold onto that hot metal with. It's good to have some forearm length leather gloves like welders use, something like that. You don't want to be fooling around with red hot metal with your bare hands, I assure you. And then you need something to pound on it with like that. So a big old blacksmith's hammer like that is what you need. Something that weighs 2 or 3 pounds. And some kind of anvil. So you got to have some kind of an iron anvil. And a piece of railroad tie that's about a foot long makes a pretty good anvil. Or you can go down to Harbor Freight or some other place and actually buy an anvil. Kind of expensive, but not too bad. So if you've got the torch for the heating, and you've got the hammer, and you've got something to hold the hot metal with, and then you've got some other tools after that, which I'll explain, which would be files, metal files. And then you need some other rasps like these. These are diamond files. Easy to get online. This one's curved on one side, flat on the other side. This one's flat on both sides, and it's a finer grit. But this is the kind of thing you need nowadays. I'd stay away from power tools as much as I can because it's too easy to gouge things and make mistakes. And then lastly, if you've got some of these little guys here, these are real fine knife sharpening tools. They come in sets like this, fine, super fine, and medium. So if we're doing the final edge on these things, that's really, really helpful and not that expensive. So what do you do when you're trying to get the metal soft enough to really work it? When you want to hammer it down, and then you also want to file it down to at least the rough form of the blade. How are you going to do that? You just need some simple things. You need, like I said, the torch, preferably a welding type torch that has the long end on it that has multiple little holes that makes a big flame. It makes a real hot flame. And so you get this thing, you clean off the metal, and then you heat it up red hot, cherry red. You don't want it to be yellow or thrown off sparks or white hot, just cherry red. And the way you know you've got the right temperature is any little simple magnet, like this little extension magnet you pick up nails off the floor. As soon as you stick a magnet against it when it's getting really red hot, and you want it to be red hot wherever you're going to work it with the hammer, it won't be magnetic anymore. Bingo, you've got it hot enough right then. So then you can work it. And if you just take it like that, if you beat it while it's red, spread it out a little bit, thin it out a little bit at the end, and then put it into something where it'll cool slowly. Sand, kitty litter, something like that. Put it in there right away. Don't let it just cool off in the air. Get it worked red hot and get it in there as quick as you can and let it cool real slowly. It will now be what's called annealed. It will have lost its temper. It will have lost its hardness. It will be as soft as it can be. Therefore, it's workable. So you can work it to a degree like that, hammering not very much. Sure, hammer's a whole lot easier when it's red hot. But at least you can work it. Now you can file it, you can shape it, whatever you want to do. You don't want to use it on some kind of power wheel and get it hot again. It's going to change the temper. You don't want that. You want it to stay nice and soft. So once you get it where you want it to be, you've got the blade flattened out as much as you want, spread a little bit at the end, got your basic blade form just as close as you can get it, file it out as much as you can so it's just almost exactly how you want it, just almost really sharp. Now what are you going to do? You're going to harden it again, and then you're going to temper it. You can find all this stuff online easily, how to work metal and how to work steel and how to temper it. But all you need is what's called a quench. You don't want water, that's just going to make it too brittle. You don't want thick oil, that's going to make it too soft. It's not going to get as firm as you want it to be. Something like about 50-50 transmission fluid and 50-50 30-weight motor oil, just all used motor oil mixed together is a perfect quench. Get a quart can, fill it up about half full with that. And then you take the tool that you've just made, the size you want, it's already made, you cut it, etc. By the way, once you soften it, then you can cut it with a hacksaw if you want to saw it off. But you heat it up red hot again, get it where it's non-magnetic, and then quench it in that quench. And instead of a slow cool like you did before with the sander or the kitty litter, now you're doing a fast cool with that particular quench fluid. Stick it in there, swirl it all around, it'll smoke a whole bunch and it'll cool off real quick. In 2 or 3 minutes it'll cool off. Now it's hard. It's real hard. It can even be brittle hard, so don't drop it. Don't leave it sitting around for a long time. Anyway, I think we're going to have to turn that phone off. Once you know, a great long video. Okay, we're going to put up with the phone. Anyway, we're almost done. So now you've quenched it and it's hard. As soon as you can, preferably that very day, you want to temper it. And all that does is take out some of that hardness by heating it to a certain temperature. If you've got one of those little shelf top or countertop toaster ovens, that's perfect. You want to set the toaster oven for something like this at about 420 degrees. And then it's probably, if it's a decent oven, it'll be pretty close to that. About 420 degrees will be just about right. Put that real hard tool in there and at 420 degrees and heat it up and let it sit there for an hour with the heat, and then let it cool off all by itself. If you really want to be real perfect about it, let it cool clear down and then do it again. Heat it up to 420, put it in there, let it sit there for an hour at 420 and let it cool off by itself. Now you will have a really good blade that won't chip. It's not too hard, it's not too soft. It'll take a really good edge when you sharpen it, and you can make your adze just like what I said. So hopefully we covered a whole lot of ground here with adzes and so little known information, that's for sure. And encourage all of you to give it a try. Certainly don't go try to make yourself a stone one, but make yourself a steel one, like I said, with a straight front on the blade and with the bevel at the top. And I think you're going to find you're going to love it. So thanks for watching. See you next time.